Hi, Bianca Raby here. If you're curious about how AI is powering classrooms to support metacognition, this conversation is for you. I'm joined by Jessica Kennedy-White, an AI EdTech expert and PhD researcher, where she shares some fascinating real-world examples of AI in action, like how it helps students break free from traditional test prep routines and engage in deeper, more thoughtful learning. We also touch on how blended learning and adaptive tools are reshaping the teacher-student dynamic, and why dialogue in the classroom is more important than ever. Whether you're an educator or just interested in the future of learning, this chat is full of insights that might surprise you. Enjoy. Hi everyone, I'm super excited today to have Jessica Kennedy-White with us. Her and I have known each other for quite a long time, actually, nearly like 5 years now, Jess, I think. Since we went to China back in 2019. So it's such an honor to have you on the show and to speak to this channel of teachers who are really engaged with technology and how to further their careers, how to find that career sovereignty, and also how to understand the world that we're in right now. So I'll let you do your introduction and then I'll do a little preamble about what we're going to speak about today.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's really great to meet you. I've been working with teachers for quite some time. I used to be a teacher myself at the beginning of my career. And now I'm working as a PhD researcher at the University of Sussex, and also with different projects such as Area9 Lyceum, as well as Open Campus. And there are lots of different exciting things going on with education technology, digital learning, and of course, the big AI hype, which has some really interesting avenues for teachers to learn different things like critical thinking, but also there are safeguarding measures to be aware of as well. So yeah, looking forward to discussing that and talking to you about that, Bianca.
Yes, so Jess is my sort of AI EdTech go-to whenever I'm like, what do I think about this? What do we think about this? I'm just throw a quick question to Jess because she's right in the thick of the research when it comes to the AI tools and in the classroom as well, which is what we're going to talk about. But firstly, what we want to do, Jess, is just define metacognition, because it's one of the terms that's going to come up a lot in this chat. And so just so we're very clear at the very beginning, what exactly do we mean when we say metacognition? And then how does that relate to AI, in which we're dealing with right now?
Okay, yeah, great question. So metacognition is one of the major focuses of my research, my PhD research. And generally, you can split it into two main categories. But of course, they integrate and interleave as you go along the process. So on the one hand, then you have metacognitive knowledge, and this refers to your knowledge of task, but also ourselves. Do we have a self-concept about ourselves? What about our self-efficacy, our self-belief? And also, what do we know about our strategies for learning? So what might be useful within a particular context? So that integrates with metacognitive regulation. And this refers to how we apply that knowledge to different learning tasks. So that can be broken down into 3 stages. And it sounds linear, which it can be, but you can also, one leads into the other. And those are planning, which is about how you're going to tackle a task, and then monitoring, which is how you believe your success is as you're going along that task, as you're learning, or project as a wider scale. And then adapting, where necessary. And then, of course, evaluation. So once you've gone through that task or that project, it can be small or large, then how are you going to identify if you've understood, if you've achieved the learning outcomes that you wanted, or have the learning outcomes changed? Because that's also a thing. They don't have to be predetermined. So it's really about the evaluation of the learning process.
Right.
And I think, metacognition originally was said to be thinking about thinking, and that doesn't really help anyone because it's quite abstract. So I think that those categories within metacognition of metacognitive knowledge and strategies really help to define it a bit more concretely for teachers, so that they can carry out that within the classroom. and how it relates to AI, then, well, there are many different ways, a lot of explorative research as well with Gen AI at the moment. But the projects that I've been working on, particularly with the PhD, have been more about adaptive learning with Area 9 Lyceum and the platform Area 9 Rhapsode. And that's particularly about the way in which, as you go through the platform, then you understand learning objectives through a particular interface, and that interface is multimodal. So you're able to grasp the quite complex knowledge in short, defined learning objectives, which then enable you to understand a little bit better with a little bit more ease. So that creates a kind of self-regulation. So it calms your nervous system. You know, obviously, if you're bombarded with knowledge, it's like panic. So being able to calm that nervous system, particularly for students maybe struggling, through that multimodal interface, so that then you can not only answer the question about the actual topic or the domain knowledge, but also you can think about, is this something that I really know, or do I have to repeat it? Or do I have to maybe go and ask my teacher, or do I need to work on it more in a project? And so that kind of development of metacognition can be both within the platform, and particularly with Area 9 Rhapsode, that's how it's devised in terms of it's embedded through the different instructional design and learning design elements. But also it's about then where do you take it after you've learned on the platform? Can you have a dialogue with your peers, with your teacher? That's the planning and the learning design that you can do in a class, both with peers and with the teacher itself. And so that's really excited blended learning experience that you can have there.
You just described my dream blended learning experience. Like this is like the gold standard of how we know what the tools can do, but often we are restricted by the technology in which we're working with as learning designers because of budgets, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess for me, what's exciting about your research and our conversations that we've had is that finally adaptive learning is getting to a place, by the sounds of things, that it's actually going to truly do what it's meant to do, which is to support students when they get to their ZPD and make sure they don't get cognitively overloaded, but they're also giving the autonomy is back onto them so that they can actually engage in their own pace and learn from themselves, which is what we know happens in classrooms real time with teachers. But if we can now do this at a larger scale, which is the good segue to your research through the platform Area 9, is it Lyceum? I'm not going to try and yeah, I don't know, I might stuff that up. But so talk to me a little bit about how that research project came about with Area 9 and sort of what the key findings have been from. I know you've done, is it 3 face-to-face classroom research pieces? But there was one particularly about in depth.
Yeah, exactly. So there were 2, one in Germany with the platform Area 9 Rhapsode, and then there was another in the UK with a research school at the London School, which is part of, multi-academy trust. And in the UK, you have these research schools where they're given the task of, exploring a research topic. And in this case, it was metacognition. It was a good match in that respect. So there's already a lot of teachers that had done the CPD, and so that was a very good school to work with, as there was a good foundation there for that topic. And in the UK, then the platform is Adapt, which is by HarperCollins, but it's fully based on the Area 9 Rhapsode platform. How did it come about? Well, it was it was a case of finding that particular school that had that metacognition focus, and that enabled a good structure to start with the teachers. And we discussed with a group of teachers, and it was a science teacher that came forward who was based in biology, which is super exciting for me because I love biology. Good. But it's also super exciting for the platform. Collins, Adapt from Collins, which is fully based on the Area 9 platform, had designed a very interesting multimodal interactive interface for biology. So, for example, in biology, then you have a reproduction of plants, for example, then there are quite a few labels that you need to put in there, and you have the drawing of the plant. And I don't know about you, Bianca, but I remember in school just like trying to draw it
Yes.
and label it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I spent half an hour drawing it, and then I had like 5 minutes to label. And so it's really good to have that just to get the foundation of the knowledge there. And it's the interactive haptic elements that also enable this kind of slowing down of your thinking so that you can pause to get that regulatory rhythm going when you're actually learning. So as you're doing these kinds of interactions, and there's also a coach which enables you to listen to the sound of the voice speaking about the question. So you've got these multimodal elements which contribute to the metacognitive processing within students are using the actual platform. So they did that for 4 weeks. Yes, 4 weeks. But it was split over blended learning. So the teacher was able to introduce what metacognition is in an age-appropriate way before they went on to the platform, and they were able to do some exercises about, have you ever learned to violin or, baked a cake? How did you start? How did you go on? How did you evaluate? And that kind of priming of the metacognition, it enabled then the understanding of the platform to be a little bit easier for Key Stage 3.
Yeah, that were Key Stage 3, right? Yeah.
So, and in the UK, then at Key Stage 2, then children are heavily tested. So they have to go through the SATs, like 11 years old, so a lot of the science teachers, and I've worked with science teachers at higher Key Stage 2, and there were constraints, and it wasn't all bad. I mean, not all testing is bad, obviously, but there were sense of teaching to the test rather than having that time to process with formative learning. It was all about summative learning, right? We're just doing it for the end point, and then you move on and you forget. And what came about through the process of actually learning with the platform and enabling the students to take time over making mistakes, but also thinking about mistakes, was that when it came to the point where they'd done the module and the teacher saw that, okay, let's take a look at what you found difficult, your most difficult learning objectives, then the teacher found that there was one question that she thought, I'm not sure why this was difficult, because we went over it. And so she did it in class, and it was quite interesting because the children were able to answer the questions about this particular, well, do you want me to go into the details? I think.
Give us the example, because it's an interesting one, because it's around this test and how that changes the mindset. So yeah, it was about what plants need to grow or something, right? Was it?
That's right. So I wasn't sure if I should go into that
you're right.
detail, but it was super interesting because it was about what plants compete for. So which resources do dandelions, docks, and thistles on a field compete with each other for? And they had learned that there were 4 things that they compete for: light, water, space, and nutrients. And the students had in their head, okay, I need to look for 4 particular answers. And so in the platform, in Adapt, then they looked at the different options and they ticked 4 answers, but they couldn't find the same 4 answers. So they were looking for space in the platform, in Adapt, but they couldn't find it. So they just, okay, well, something like space, root systems.
Yeah.
And then carried on. And when the teacher approached the class and said, I'm a bit confused. Why did you say root system? It's like, oh, get off my roots sort of thing. Did you think about that? And then they were like, oh, wait a minute, hang on. I just, yeah, it's not roots, is it? And she's like, no. So, and they were like, oh, we were looking for 4. And what came out of that is that she realized that the children had learned procedurally that they must do the strategy for the test.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't thinking about what is the question asking me and
Mm-hmm.
what are the answers and how can I think about those answers.
Mm-hmm.
So that brought out this metacognitive discussion about, okay, it's not about remembering the procedure of I have to find four.
Mm-hmm.
It's looking at the question, understanding the question, and exploring that. And if you don't know it, then of course that's something that the teacher can teach.
Yeah. What a
Um,
fantastic example also of how the data can be used to inform that amazing conversation. So you
right,
wouldn't know that if you probably wouldn't know that if that was a pen and paper test, because you
right.
wouldn't probably, unless you sat down and did the full analysis and you spreadsheeted it and you really looked at every question, you might not get that,
Which takes
which takes a long time, right? So, this conversation today is really highlighting a good news story in AI, in the sense that we are seeing AI power some of these tools to make these adaptive learning experiences whereby we have this data to be used for good. And I think that's a really great example. What other of the findings? So as we wrap up this conversation, what other findings did you have from that particular class? Because it seems like it was a really
yeah.
dynamic and perfect place to this research.
Yeah, it was a great example of how you can really work with adaptive learning, particularly from this platform Adapt, fully based on the Area 9 Rhapsode platform, to really kind of unlearn what the students had learned at their key stage 2 level, which was I need to remember fixed procedures for the test, and that's what will get me through school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not about, I think there's a hidden curriculum that often students don't know why they're in school. They're like, oh, I'm here to just,
Yeah.
achieve these marks, right?
Yeah. I get my
No,
certificate.
actually,
Mm.
yeah, you'll get your certificate or get to university or get to the best, job. And it's actually about learning.
Yeah. Oh my
So,
gosh. What? Really?
yeah,
Yeah.
education does involve learning sometimes. And, it's about how can we make that more visible with the platforms, and how can we, as you said, like use that data in a way that helps the teachers. So looking at the most difficult learning objectives, and it's not always right, it doesn't always align,
Mm-mm.
but then that's the discursive element of where the teacher can then go into the classroom like she did and explore, why are they getting it wrong? What's behind that number? Often it's a quite complex issue, as we
Mm.
found, which is about how can you unlearn the testing mindset.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, the most important finding,
Yeah.
in my opinion, because then that led on to her exploring that metacognitive understanding of biology, of reproduction within the classroom, and achieving her goal, which was, how can I help the students to become scientists of the future? Even if they don't go on to become a scientist,
Sure.
they have the scientific
Thinking.
thinking and the critical thinking to apply to many situations that, God
Yeah.
knows we need right now.
And
It-
we've been talking a lot over the last, 10 years, it feels like, about learning how to learn, and this is it. And it's such a great
Mm,
example of having teacher working with technology, not against it, not in
right.
isolation, and to have that blended experience be really powered through that adaptive, which is, again, when we first started talking about adaptive learning, we're like, this sounds amazing. But it really, the tech, I have not been that excited by it, to be honest, until now. So it seems like it's now actually getting to the point where it's matured enough that it is going to, like you said, and what you've seen, really accelerate that conversation in the classroom. And I imagine for that teacher too, their metacognition is improving as they are in that process with the students, helping them to
Yeah.
understand. There's also a layer of their own learning that's coming to the surface as well, right?
Definitely. And I think that was the major thing. Thank you for bringing that up, because that was another major finding of, like,
Mm.
it's not just the learners that are developing their metacognition, it's the teacher as well. And she was able to reflect upon her own teaching practices and how to use that. At first, it was a little bit overwhelming for her to think about, okay, how am I going to do this? But I really worked with her in a kind of co-design process,
Right.
which is methodology of it's design-based research, where it's a little bit like action research, which is quite familiar probably to a lot of teachers, where you co-design with perhaps a researcher to figure out those strategies which can scaffold not only the children's learning, but also her blended learning process. But she took to it like, you know, a duck in water after just a little bit of guidance.
Brilliant.
Of like, oh, wow, okay, I can do this with the data, and this will help. You know, she's a scientist, so it also helps. And also having that understanding that she can have this dialogue. So the dialogue was a really important element.
Huge.
And it was equal dialogue. She wasn't patronizing the students. She was openly saying, I genuinely want to know what happened here. Not this is wrong, do it again. And that's the end of the story. It's like exploring through dialogue.
You set up a culture of inquiry from the beginning, right? I mean, that's
right.
The entire conversation, which is fabulous. And I know that most teachers out there are always willing to hear anything that's going to help them do a better job. And I think this is a really good example of how we can, you know, merge in with the technology and let it help us do a better job. So that's fabulous, Jess. I'm going to end with one question, which I always end with these conversations is, and I think I already know the answer, but you're willing to put another one up there. But what are you most excited about in the online education space right now, from what you're seeing in your research and obviously the technology that you're privy to that most of us aren't on a daily basis?
Yeah, what I'm really excited about, you probably have already guessed, is dialogue, because I think, you know, that this is really something that I think has been hindered in. I really dislike this kind of, oh, it's the teachers that are, I think it's not at all. It's a lot of the time, it's the structural elements that are causing people to be forced, or teachers often to be forced into doing things that hinder this dialogue. So having a platform such as Adapt, for example, come in and use that as a starting point or a middle point, and also to use it afterwards to discuss those difficult sticking points, those difficult learning objectives, but also with, you know, the future of Gen AI, there are many difficulties with that. But I also see that the kinds of interventions that you can have where if the student, for example, does get stuck, the ratio of the teachers to the students is difficult, 30-1 sometimes, and, you know, probably more in some cases. And there are ways to embed that dialogue and maybe safeguard that dialogue to just be about the domain knowledge, but also have that kind of emotional understanding of what the student is going through. Now, you know, I'm kind of blue sky thinking here.
Yeah, that's okay. That's your job as a researcher.
But that's what I would really like to see in the future. So this marrying of, you know, adaptive learning with the dialogue element of helping the students at these critical moments, because I've seen in class where even if they have these platforms to help them, they often get stuck and then don't know what to do next. And having that critical friend to say, do you need help? What can we work with here? Who is not going to reprimand them for their mistakes or get angry with them, but rather to gently find ways to suggest solutions, or do you want to draw it out, you know, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is missing.
Absolutely. The promises that AI is supposed to save us a lot of time and open up all this extra space. So maybe will be time for these types of conversations to be facilitated through the technology, which is fantastic. And those dream moments can happen a lot more often in a classroom, because I don't think there'd be any teachers watching saying they don't want to have those conversations. So that's fantastic. Great thing to be excited by. Thank you so much for sharing with us this wonderful work that you've been doing. And I know you're on the home stretch of your PhD, and it's a big undertaking. So as one sort of, you know, A type to another, I wish you the best as you as you finish up in the next 6 months. And we can't wait to see what you're going to do when you come back into the world as with doctor next to your name, and what kind of things are going to happen, because this space is moving every week. So yeah, thank you for joining us, Jess.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And until next time, stay awesome.